This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
It's a joy to be with you on this All Saints and All Souls weekend and Pride weekend, and I delight in your celebration. Some 20 years ago, I went to Cuernavaca for a couple of weeks to work on my Spanish. I happened to be there over All Saints' Day, and the language school scheduled a visit to a small pueblo. We walked the streets, and everywhere we were invited into homes to visit the ofrendas, the altars where the family's dead were remembered each year. Each visitor was plied with food and drink, tamales, empanadas, horchata, and occasionally spirits of the liquid kind, and urged to remember and pray for those who had died in the previous year. El Dia de los Muertos includes elements of Aztec culture, as Halloween jack-o'-lanterns and goblins reflect older Celtic customs. Both of them bear witness to those who have gone before us as we celebrate those feasts of All Saints and All Souls. The saints are remembered on the 1st of November as holy and heroic examples of faithful living and witnesses to love of God and neighbor. All Souls includes all the faithful departed, all God's beloved, especially those we have known and loved. And we're going to remember them specifically today, knowing that not one of them is lost or forgotten by God. In this part of the Christian tradition, we also see that all of the baptized are saints, those who walk in the way of Jesus. San Francisco has a church called St. Gregory of Nyssa, where the worship space has much higher walls than these and has a massive icon of the saints, 90 of them, painted high on the walls, dancing around the building. They include some familiar ones like Bartolomé de las Casas and Francis of Assisi, and some whose love of God and neighbor challenges the world to open itself to a larger vision. People like Anne Frank, Black Elk, John Muir, Jalal ad-Din Rumi, a medieval Sufi poet, Sojourner Truth, William Blake, Thurgood Marshall. Some of them are almost completely unknown to us, including people like Chiune Sugihara, who was a Japanese diplomat in Lithuania during the Second World War and wrote transit visas for thousands of Jews fleeing the Holocaust. Another is Sorgaktani Beki, a Christian who exercised immense influence on cultural and intellectual exchange in the Mongol Empire, and she happened to be the mother of Kublai Khan. That hymn we just sang about meeting saints on trains or at sea is only a start. Saints are the holy and heroic examples of God's love in human flesh. The saints include all who love God and neighbors as themselves, whether the world knows them or not. Whose icons would you put on these walls? The visionaries who planted this congregation here nearly 90 years ago to love and serve your neighbors? Maybe the muralist who's going to paint your alley wall? We might include workers at Well in the Desert, prayer shawl knitters, Sunday school teachers, adult literacy tutors, choir members, and the altar guild, administrators and cleaners, stewards and gardeners, Eucharistic ministers, and generous givers, and the coffee makers and cookie bakers without whom no congregation long endures. But we'd also want to notice the quiet ones, people who are loving neighbors on their daily rounds, parents teaching children how to share, teachers and students looking out for the kids who get ignored, the people who do their best to help us even when we're utter strangers, the people who confront bullies, who lead others out of danger, those who work in myriad ways to build a society of peace. The Lord God made them all and planted love in their hearts, love that overflows in abundance for all of God's beloved creatures and creation. That's why we're gathered here today around this banquet table. It's a foretaste of Isaiah's vision of a healed world, where all peoples sit down together in peace because there is justice. We might define justice most simply as loving neighbors in public life. Here we are once again invited into that feast of love in the hope that every single person around this table will not only be filled, but fed for the work around us, in the neighborhood and every neighborhood that we enter. That neighborly work looks like feeding the hungry in this desert, and like being love in the flesh for the rejected and the ignored. It also looks like standing with our elder brothers and sisters in the faith at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, as well as with Temple Isaiah and the Islamic Society here in Palm Springs. We stand together, for Jesus has called them blessed who are persecuted or reviled or falsely charged. We are all children of the same God, no more and no less than Baptists or Roman Catholics. Isaiah's vision of a great banquet on the hillside is meant for all people and all nations. Our elder siblings in the faith long ago saw God's dream of the human family gathered together as one in peace. Jesus calls blessed those who love their neighbors in grief and sorrow, in concentration camps and prisons, in exclusion and derision, and as subjects of fake news. Blessed are those who seek peace, and those who work for justice, and those who walk humbly with God and every neighbor. This congregation exists to be a fully alive place where love is shared day and night, where all are welcome without exception. You continue to grow fearlessly into a vision where parish means something more like the roots of that word, para oikos, near the house, the neighborhood. This is a neighborhood love center for nearby homes and people, for sojourners and aliens, like our wandering biblical ancestors who counted on hospitality and provided it abundantly to all comers. Tree of Life in Pittsburgh is our neighbor, as are the hungry children in this valley and the LGBTQI community celebrating with pride this weekend. We cannot love our neighbors if we cannot love ourselves and give thanks to God for how we have been created and how all others have been created. God's creation is a riot of diversity, and we are charged to be its stewards and its lovers. Saints come in all varieties, and there's nothing about our created condition that inherently excludes anyone from that title, even though we human beings often fail to see the holiness and love in somebody who seems different. St. Jerome is one of my favorite examples. He was a grumpy curmudgeon who spent his life translating the Bible into vernacular Latin. He was a monk, and his brothers did not like him. But the love he had to give emerged in words of beauty. Saints aren't always sweetness and light. And anger can be the motivating passion that leads to transformation and greater justice. Think about the abolitionists, the women's suffrage leaders, the civil rights movement, the Stonewall riots, and Me Too. Anger is appropriate in the face of gross injustice. Jesus gets angry when the little ones are led astray or ostracized or prevented from reaching him. And the little ones aren't just children. They're the socially unwelcome and the powerless. Most of us are angry at the senseless deaths in synagogues and churches and mosques and schoolyards. Rabbi Edwin Freeman famously noted that when you're pushing transformation in a healthy direction, you'll know it's working when the resistance gets intense. Blessed are the angry who yearn for justice, for they will ultimately receive it. How can our anger bless the wounded and broken world around us? Anger is often a sign of yearning for love, and for the kind of love that we call justice. Saints use that anger to transform the world into a banquet of peace. The banquet cloth is being laid, and the feast has begun. Saints are dancing around us and among us, bearing love and doing justice and walking humbly with the God who made us all. Come dance around the table, saints, and then dance out into the world as fountains of unquenchable love.